Okay, good. All right. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, May, and thank you, Matthew, for organizing this meeting. Good afternoon, everyone. I think I'm looking at a lot of blank screen here. That's okay. If you want to show your video, that's okay too. So first of all, my name is Marcus. Thank you very much for attending this presentation here today. Maybe as you have heard, I mean, the topic of the presentation today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the topic of depression. So just a little bit information about myself. My name is Marcus. Once again, I am currently a registered social worker in Alberta. I'm also a counselor working in a local counseling agency. And what I do is I do provide counseling services to anybody who comes to the agency report struggling with any kind of mental health concern. So it could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be PTSD, it could be a lot of different things that they do bother them. So we're a very busy organization, and so this is what I've been doing in the past 5 years. Before I become a counselor, I was actually working in a local immigrant service agency as well, just serving the immigrant population. And that was when I first graduated from the University of Calgary. So I do have a Bachelor of Sociology, and then I have a Master of Social Work right now. And before I went into social work, I was working in Chinatown in a very local organization, just serving the immigrant population again. And I remember when I was working there for 3 years, what I saw also, although it was within the Chinese community, what I saw was there was a huge need about services in the mental health area. So as I was serving the immigrant population, people are coming to me talking about there are actually a lot of barriers for them to access services. Not only that, they were also going through a lot of personal issues, family issues. Some of them are also struggling with mental health issues as well. And that really started my interest in going back to school and pursue a Master of Social Work and kind of dive into the counseling career and to become a counselor. And this is where I came from. So I know this presentation is going to take about an hour long with a few participants here. What I'm hoping to do is, I will have a PowerPoint ready, and I really want to hope to make this presentation to be a very interactive session. Okay, so if any of you have any questions about what I'm saying here, feel free to jump in or raise your hand so that I can answer your questions. If you have anything in mind, please do not hesitate to let me know also, and I'll pause my presentation and I'll answer your question. Okay, so what I really wanted to do today is just to give everybody a very brief idea in terms of what depression really is. Now, before I start the topic, I'd like to stress that I don't know where we came from, or are we all immigrants, or, some of us might not be. However, I just want to stress that up until today, although, the topic of mental health is really getting popular, people are really paying more attention to the idea of mental health nowadays, other than just physical health, because traditionally, people tend to focus on the traditional health more than the mental health. But nowadays, especially with COVID happening, we do see a lot of people started to pay attention to the mental health issues, checking whether or not they feel healthy mentally, whether or not they're happy, whether or not they feel good about their lives, or they feel good about themselves. However, what I'd like to stress is that, unfortunately, there's still a huge stigma in our community, especially the ethnic community, about the idea about mental health. It's something that we rarely talked about in our society. It's something that people do not want to discuss too much because of that stigma. When people think about mental health, especially in my community anyways, the first thing that they think of is, that person, I mean, there are different stereotypes and biases when it comes to mental health. People might think that people are crazy, or they're just struggling, or there's some problems with them. Well, I'd like to stress that in terms of mental health, this is really no different than your physical health. Okay, so what we know that is that when people are sick, they're very eager to go see a doctor to find out what's happening to their physical health. But when it comes to mental health issues, people seem to be somewhat more hesitant because, the idea of mental health is not well known in our community. and there's still a huge stigma involved. So I just want to let everyone know that, the idea of mental health is very common. It's really no different than your physical health. And, when you're not feeling healthy mentally, the idea is that it has a lot of potential and it can really impact your physical health as well, which I'll talk about in the presentation. So just an idea, just remember that there's really no health, or there's no physical health without mental health. Now, before I start here, I was wondering, and before I pull up this presentation, does anybody have any questions about this topic that they'd like to know, or any questions about depression, anything that they'd like to know or get out of from this presentation?
Actually, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I know this presentation will be in English, but I'm still wondering if you're able to understand Mandarin, like, understand a question and answer the question in Mandarin.
Yeah, I can answer a question in Mandarin.
But you're concerning about other participants,
yeah,
right?
I'm concerning about other participants. I think some participants here might understand Mandarin, so I'll try my best to answer my questions. Or, what you can do is you may leave the questions at the end of the presentation, and I'll answer that. I know May can attest to that. There is another presentation that's going on that is actually in Mandarin. I think that's going to be on July 2nd. Okay, so I'll repeat the same presentation again, but in Mandarin, and I'll be responding questions in Mandarin as well. But you know what, if you have any questions right now, I mean, you can either ask that in English or you can ask Mandarin questions as well. I'll try my best to kind of translate and let the participants know what you're asking about as well.
Yeah, that works too. Thank
That'd
you.
be all right, no worries.
Yeah,
now, any more questions before we start the presentation here? Anything that you'd like to know about depression? Any questions or concerns? Okay, so if there's nothing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and I will just go to the presentation today. And I'll see if I can make this work. All right. Now, is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So yeah, so what I'm going to talk about today is, I know when it comes to mental health, there is actually a lot of different kind of mental health issues. However, depression is something that we see a lot, just clinically when we're serving our clients. I know in my agency here, there are 3 different issues that people are coming in with. And, depression is actually the second most prevalent. The first one is the anxiety. Anxiety is different from depression, which I'll talk about later. I know I'm going to do another presentation again on anxiety later. Perhaps I think it's going to be in August, but, we're going to talk about depression today. So just bear in mind, I mean, depression is a very, very common, mental health conditions that everyone is struggling with. Now, I have a question though to the audience. When you think about the word of depression, what comes to your mind? What can you think about?
People got no reason for crying.
No
All
reason.
of a sudden, yeah.
So people just, for no reason, they started crying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, that could be one of it. Anything else?
Don't feel like doing anything.
Don't feel like doing anything? Yeah, feeling very demotivated. What else comes to mind when you think about depression? What is it like?
Sad.
Sad. Now, that's a very smart answer when somebody talked about sad. I mean, the first thing, you're right, the first thing that people often think about when it comes to depression is sadness. Anything else?
Quiet.
Sorry?
Quiet.
Quiet. Okay, so people don't tend to talk a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Good.
What about moody?
Moody. Yeah. What does it mean by moody, May? How do you define it?
feeling up and down.
Yeah, their feelings actually fluctuate quite a bit. So sometimes good, sometimes bad. So they're quite moody. Okay. So I'm just going to talk about, and these are all great answers. So I'm just going to talk about what depression is really about. So what we know about depression, simply put, is it's a mental health condition. Okay. So just like any kind of physical condition, like if you get a cold or a flu or anything like that, depression is one of the most common mental health conditions that we do see every day. And it's very common. I'll talk about that later. Now, mainly depression affects the way of how you feel. And basically, it's not just how you feel, it's also about how you think, how you feel, and what you do. Okay, so depression affects a person in a lot of different ways. It does first affect in terms of, the way of how you think, and then how you feel, and then what you do. Okay, and this is how depression starts to affect people. It really gets to your thought. It's a very common mood disorder that, present with depressed mood. Depressed means like very low, down, dark mood, right? Somebody talked about the loss of interest or pleasure. So what does that mean is, when you're talking to somebody who's depressed, they often tell you that, hey, you know what, I used to enjoy this and that. And right now I'm no longer enjoying the activities that I used to enjoy, right? I just don't find any joy in those activities anymore. Now, feelings of guilt. Guilt means like, no matter what I say or what I do, I feel like it's always my fault. Okay, so people with depression often struggle with blame, especially blaming themselves or sometimes blaming others as well. Okay, but the guilt piece, comes from really thinking about I am perhaps not good enough, I'm bad, that kind of idea. Low self-worth, right? They don't tend to think of themselves too much when people struggle with depression. They think that, they're bad, I'm not good enough, no matter what I do, people don't like me, that kind of idea. Now, on the physical side, I mean, not just how you feel about yourself, but on the physical side, people with depression also struggle with disturbed sleep, low appetite, right? So they, sometimes they can't eat, or sometimes they eat too much, they're not sleeping well, they have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. You're struggling with low energy. Somebody talked about it. It's like no matter what they do, they can't find the energy to go about anything. So when you talk to people with depression, sometimes they would complain about, Marcus, I just feel very, very tired all the time. I sleep a lot, but I never feel energized. Okay, that kind of idea. Now, on the physical side, the other one is poor concentration. Okay, why? And because, when depression takes place, it really impairs the ability to think. Okay, it really impairs the ability to function and think. And this is why the concentration, skills is pretty low when you're being affected by depression. Now, this is some of the things that we're paying attention to. There are more symptoms that I'm going to talk about, but in a nutshell, this is what people with depression have been telling us is, we know that, hey, they just don't feel like it is themselves. Now, somebody talked about sadness, which is, of course, a core component of depression as well. However, what I would like to stress is depression is just different from a bad day. Okay. Now, the question is, how can I tell that I have depression when I'm sad? Like, I'm sad. Does that mean that I have depression? Now, the answer is not necessary, okay? Because what we know is sadness is a very common emotion, as if like happiness, sorrow, guilt, embarrassment, or anything like that, joy. Sadness is one of the very common experiences of people. Okay, like, when we're born, we feel happy. At the same time, we have an ability to feel sad. So how do I know, and how do I question myself if I'm started to get depressed? What we know about depression is, it can really start at any time. And the idea of depression is that it can start anytime, and it can also last for a fairly long time. Okay. It's not something that you can get over on your own when it comes to depression, because it's a mental health condition. It does not easily go away by itself when you're depressed. So think about yourself. And I'd like to ask everybody a question. Maybe just somebody, I can't see you guys, but I want you to reflect it. Now, in the past 7 days here, I want you to think about, did anybody just feel sad in the past 7 days? Did you feel sad for at least one day? I want you to ask yourself that question. Did I feel sad just one day out of the 7 days? Did I feel sad just one day? And then I want you to ask yourself, out of the 7 days, did I feel sad 2 or 3 days out of the 7 days? And I want you to ask yourself, in the past 7 days, did I feel sad all the times? And in the past 7 days, I feel sad. And I want you to ask yourself that. Or even in the past 14 days, in the last 2 weeks here, you think about it. Did I feel sad all the time, like almost always? Or did I feel sad frequently? Or did I feel sad just sometimes? Or did I feel sad just rarely? And that really sets apart sadness from depression when you think about it. What we know is, yeah, people, I mean, life happens, and there's a lot of things that in life that would make you feel sad. But when people are consistently feeling sad for a prolonged period of time, then we want people to pay attention to it, especially as a type of sadness that you can't really get out by yourself. Like, no matter what I do and how I try to think differently, I just can't get out of that dark mood. Now, that's when you really have to pay attention. Okay, so just to illustrate this, as what I said, I mean, in the first picture here, you see from Monday to Sunday, right? It says everybody feels sad sometimes. So it could be that on Monday, well, it's the start of the work week. I don't feel like I want to go to work. Work is very annoying, frustrating. You might feel sad that day. Tuesday, you know what? Not so much. It's second day of the work week. I'm feeling fine. Wednesday, I'm feeling okay. Maybe I'm actually feeling happy. And then until Thursday, something actually happens, or maybe you get into an accident, or you failed on an exam or whatever, then you feel sad. But then Friday, Saturday, and then the weekend comes, yay, I don't have to go to work. I'm feeling happy again. Now, that's just normal sadness, right? And it happens, within a given week that, there are times when people just don't feel like it. They feel like it's sad. However, with depression, you can see the picture, you feel sad a lot. From Monday to Wednesday, especially, it's not just 1 week. If you think about 1 week, weeks after week, second week's the same, third week is the same, then I need you to pay attention to what you're struggling with currently. Now, does anybody have any questions about this so far?
I'm just curious about something.
Yeah.
Is it true that depression doesn't happen overnight? Like, for example, can I wake up tomorrow and say I have depression? Or is this something that is built over time?
It's a very interesting question. I think it depends on context. When we're assessing whether or not somebody is depressed, we look at the context, we look at what happened to this person, like meaning external factors. At the same time, we look at how long the person have been struggling this way, right? And the frequency and the intensity of the sadness. So there's a lot of things that we're also paying attention to. Can it be an overnight thing? Usually depression doesn't develop overnight, okay? Unless there is an external event that happened, okay? But it takes time to develop. When you think about depression, it does take time to develop. It's not just a minute, oh, the last minute I didn't have depression, this minute I have depression. You can't say it that way. It's slowly and gradually developing, okay? And I'll talk about how does this develop later, and when is the most common times. But it usually does not happen overnight, unless, I mean, an event can happen overnight, but your feelings and the development of depression usually occurs over time. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody has any questions about this? Okay. Now, again, I mean, I just wanted to stress the importance of knowing what's the difference between depression and sadness. I mean, just because you're sad, it doesn't mean that you're depressed, but when you're depressed, it really comes with sadness. So when it comes to sadness, it's just really the feeling of sorrow or unhappiness. Again, it could be something that happened in your life, you don't like it, or you failed the exam, or you broke up with somebody, or somebody passed away. I mean, that could be just sadness, right? They have similar reactions. Sadness and depression have similar reactions, except for depression, it does last longer than sadness. Now, for sadness, usually you don't have to do a lot about it. It can go away the next day, but depression doesn't usually go away on its own again. And depression can affect somebody's mood, causing them again to feel drained, cause them to feel like they can feel down for weeks, and sometimes not for weeks. What we see in counseling is there are people who are telling us that, hey, you know what, I've been struggling with this for not just for weeks, it's been for months or even for years. And sometimes, some people would tell you that, yeah, I've been feeling this way for a very, very long time, as far as I can remember. Okay, so it can be for years as well. And this is what we call chronic depression. It's like, this is almost like the ongoing state of that person. I mean, what's happening to that person. Again, sadness doesn't last very long. It can be something that makes you sad, and eventually you will get over it. Okay, so just remember, just because you're sad doesn't mean that you're depressed, but when you're depressed, it really comes with the notion of sadness. Okay. Now, I'm just going to go over some signs and symptoms of depression. Again, I mean, as I'm going through this presentation, you may not think that this presentation is relevant to you. If it's not to you, I am just making a bet here. It must be relevant to at least one person in your life, just considering how widespread, depression is nowadays in our society and everything. So when it comes to signs and symptoms, so you're just going through the symptoms here, you're paying attention to the signs, just thinking about, hey, you know what, there's going to be a person in my life, if not myself, that must be going through this, I think. Now, for example, some of the symptoms include, the persistent sadness. Persistent means like ongoing. It's not going away. It's very stubborn, okay? So persistent sadness, feeling anxious. Now, it could be feeling empty as well. So you're neither feeling sad or happy, but you could feel apathetic. Apathetic means like I'm not even feeling anything, or I don't care. Okay, so that kind of feeling can also, be a symptom of depression as well. Now, the other one that we look at is the notion of hopelessness. When people feel depressed, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of people who are depressed actually feel a sense of hopelessness. Hopelessness means like, no matter what I do, nothing's gonna change. That kind of feeling and thought. Okay, so when somebody is depressed, they're often hopeless. They're very pessimistic. Okay, like they look into the dark side of things. Okay. One thing that is very interesting about depression is, when people are depressed, one thing that is that people are really struggling with is they tend to look at things and issues and external life events just from one angle, and it's usually very dark. Okay, it's just, always about the negative side of things. They kind of lose the ability to even think or feel neutrally or even positively. Okay, and this is why, I mean, you must have a friend or family members like that. No matter what you talk to them, you feel like you're constantly talking to a brick wall. They're always negative. They sound negative, they look negative. Now, that's something that you should be aware. Feelings of guilt I talked about, feeling worthlessness, and at the same time, helplessness. Now, helplessness and hopelessness are really the classical symptoms of depression. Not only do people feel hopeless about their lives, like again, they feel like no matter what they do, things are not going to change. The second thing that they feel is nobody can help me. I cannot help myself. Nobody around me can help me. And no matter what I do, nothing's going to change. So this is where the hopelessness and the helplessness come in. Now you think about the person's state of mind. When people constantly live in that state, you wonder, yeah, how could somebody actually be happy? Nobody can help me. Nothing's going to change. And then the third thing is, why bother changing anything anyways? Right. So that leads to the demotivation piece. Now, the other one that we want to talk about is, feeling irritated. Okay, like feeling grumpy, angry, easy to anger. Okay, I'm just very easily to get angry. Feeling restless. Restless is, I'm just constantly, frustrated, not settled. Again, loss of interest in activities and hobbies. Feeling very tired and decreased energy. Okay, again, I don't feel like I have had people who tell me, Marcus, I just don't feel like I'm half a person that I used to be. Or, there are people who are very young and come and see me. They're like, Marcus, I feel tired all the time. I feel like I'm an old person. I don't know why. I just feel very sleepy, tired all the time. I can easily fall asleep. Difficulty concentrating, remembering details, or making decisions. Now, people with depression often have a hard time when it comes to decision making. Okay, they're very hesitant. Now that has to do with something about, it has to do with their mind and how their thinking ability is often being impaired by depression, because depression forces them really to think one way when there are actually multiple ways to approach an issue. Now on the physical side, again, I talked about insomnia. So people have a hard time going to sleep or staying asleep. Or on the flip side, people actually find themselves that they sleep a lot. Okay, it's like no matter what I do, I sleep. I just sleep, and I never want to wake up. That kind of thing. Overeating or not having an appetite. Again, it affects how much you eat, what you eat, whether or not you want to eat. The third thing on the slide here, it talks about the thoughts of suicide or suicide attempts. Now, this is a very tricky one, because I'd like to stress that, contrary to what people believe, now, not all of the people who think of, not all of the people who are depressed actually think about suicide. Okay. Only some people who are depressed actually have thoughts of suicide. Okay, so when you have a friend and you're concerned about them and you think about, oh, they must have depression, oh, I'm worried about that, they will commit suicide. Now, that's not necessarily the case, although there's always a possibility when people's depression are getting severe, when it is prolonged, right? When it's going on for a long time and people find themselves trapped in those negative thoughts, then the thoughts of suicide sometimes comes up. But it doesn't mean that everyone who's depressed have ever thought about suicide. However, it's something that we check with people who are depressed. We ask them, hey, you know what? Life is very difficult. And, it sounds like you're going through a very, very difficult time. Have you ever had thoughts of ending your life? We check that all the time, but just remember, not everyone who is depressed, actually think about suicide, although most of them don't, okay, but some of them will. Now, the other one that we look at, now this may not, when people are experiencing pains and aches, such as headaches, cramps, cramps in the body, digestive issues, that don't ease even with treatment. So a lot of them are actually unexplained, right? You go to a doctor, you complain about pain, you complain about headache, it doesn't, and the doctor really can't explain it. They did a lot of blood work with you and say that, hey, everything is fine. the blood work comes back fine. Now, sometimes that leads us to think about also the possibility of depression as well, because depression does affect, our physical and our somatic functioning. Okay. Now, let me ask everybody a question. When somebody is depressed, what do you feel like, other than headaches or pains, what do you feel like they most likely to struggle with when it comes to physical symptoms? Does anybody have any idea?
Can you repeat the question?
Like, when somebody is depressed, what do you think is one of the most obvious symptoms, physical symptoms, that people would often experience? Physical symptoms.
Putting on weight?
Sometimes.
Complaining all the times.
Yeah, complaining all the times, but I'm talking about physical symptoms. Like when you're depressed, what physical symptoms often happen?
That's what I'm saying before, that crying for no reason.
Yeah. Now, crying is not a physical symptom. Now, let me give you a tips. It's often the stomach. Okay. Now, when people are depressed, often they complain about stomach pain. So or when people are anxious, they also complain about stomach pain. Okay. Now, headache is one of them. But when your stomach is having issues, right, and you go see a doctor, everything's fine. Now, sometimes the doctor will ask you, are you experiencing stress? Are you sad? And stuff like that. So for some reason, it sounds like there's a connection between how our brain works and how our body works, and they're somewhat connected. So we do hear people talking about, when I am depressed, I don't know why my stomach hurts, right? Or I have diarrhea, digestive issues, as the slide said. So just something to pay attention to. Now, also, everybody experiences depression differently. Now, somebody talked about crying. When somebody's depressed, yeah, they can cry a lot. Some people can become very quiet. Some people can just be very reserved. Some people, you cannot even see that they're depressed, right? They could be very happy on the outside. It doesn't mean that you're not depressed at all. So everybody experiences depression differently, and they do experience the symptoms differently. Okay. Some people have headaches, some people don't. Some people have stomach pain, some people don't. Okay. So it's really important to remember that as well. So people's experience of depression can be different, but they're actually common symptoms that we're looking for. Okay. Now, what I also want to mention when it comes to depression is depression can just affect anybody. Now, you think about, well, is this person having depression because he or she is old, or whether or not they're poor, they don't have enough money, that's why they're depressed, or stuff like that. Whether or not they're educated, it doesn't matter. So research has been telling us that depression can actually affect anybody. It could be young people, old people, rich people, poor people, men and women. Okay, anybody can actually experience depression in their lifetime. Okay. Now, however, there are certain times when depression would affect somebody more than other times. Okay, and I've highlighted this. What we have come to understand is sometimes depression tends to affect people when a person is going through changes in their lives. And with change, there also comes with the stress as well. Now, it's very important to remember that every time when somebody is going through a change, it can create stress. And if the change is often if it often gets unmanaged, or people find it hard to manage that change, difficult feelings can develop. Okay, so something to always remember. So what are you talking about, Marcus, when it comes to changes? It could be anything. It could be changing school, changing your job, or your boss is leaving, you get a new boss, moving, right? Or losing somebody who's significant to you, like let's say losing a partner, losing somebody who's important, or a divorce could be a big change, right? Breaking up with your boyfriend or girlfriend. So those are the changes that we're talking about. Now, what we also know is if people have a greater ability to adapt to changes, the less likely that they will be affected by depression. Okay, so this is one question that I want everybody to ask themselves is, how good am I able to respond to changes? Now, you may or may not want to share this, but I want you to think about this yourself. Like, how good am I actually able to manage change or tolerate change? Okay, especially when it comes to change, it does also come with stress, but also uncertainty. Uncertainty means things that we don't know that's happening in the future, right? That we're not so sure about. Now, when people do not tolerate uncertainty well, they're also more prone to depression. Okay, so this is something very important to remember. Does anybody have questions about this so far?
I do have a question.
Yep.
Your previous two slides, one refers to the physical symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And the one prior to that refers to more like the emotional symptoms.
Yeah.
Can you have all that is listed in the emotional side of things and no physical manifestations?
Many good questions. The answer is not absolute. Again, I mean, everybody experiences depression differently. Okay. But my answer would be unlikely. Okay. Now, don't quote me on this. I mean, of course, there will be people who just struggle psychologically. Okay. But at the same time, it's really hard to imagine somebody who just struggle psychologically, but not physically. Now, for example, when you constantly feel guilty, hopeless, helpless, or anxious, it does affect a lot of the physical side of your body. For example, your heart. Is your heart going to pound more when you feel anxious, right? When your mind is so busy on focusing on the negative stuff, does that affect your concentration? Does that affect your sleep? Does that affect your appetite? Do you understand what I mean? So there's more like a direct correlation between the psychological and the physical, meaning like if you're struggling psychologically, most likely your physical and your somatic side of the body will also get affected. Does that make sense? So it's really hard for you to feel anxious, but then your heart doesn't jump more because it's just automatic. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
Logically, it makes sense. It's just that I do know someone who has, I can check off every item here, the 7 items, I can check it off here.
Yeah.
That this person has.
Yeah.
When I look at your physical list,
yeah,
I cannot check off anything here.
Yeah. So it does happen sometimes. It does happen sometimes, or maybe we just don't notice that.
Yeah.
Right. Or maybe the other person does not tell you about that.
Exactly.
Or maybe the other person hasn't even made the connection.
Yeah.
Between the physical and the psychological. Now, I've been talking to doctors a lot of times, and there's family doctors that I know of, and doctors will tell you the same thing, that there are clients who often comes in reporting physical symptoms that I'm listing on the list, but on the physical side, after they've done some blood work or anything, nothing is abnormal. Mm-hmm. Right? So that leads us to think about, hey, you know what, are the symptoms created or evolved from the psychological side of things? So what we know is there's definitely connection. However, it's not absolute, right? There are people who experience the psychological symptoms, but not the physical. But I would assume that most of them do.
Mhm. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay. Any more questions?
I got the same feeling as May just say, I know somebody, and actually I think she got to, over comparisons. She always compare with somebody, and actually she got a good life, but then she keep saying that she can't do anything, she
Yeah.
don't have anything or whatever. So actually she create the depression herself. And as you said that she don't have the symptom of stomachache or whatever, but she feel sad all the time.
Yeah.
So we don't know how to help, but we know that she didn't need to be depressed. A lot of things she's already got pretty good life, but then she compared too much.
Yeah.
And then she wants to do the things that she got no control, that her husband doesn't want to do it, and then she keeps saying that there's no life and she can't do anything, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So is that a sign of depression?
No, it's hard to say, but you know what you have described to me, you think about, you know, the comparison. One thing that we know about, you know, this is, you know, perhaps a little bit more advanced, but when it comes to treating with depression, we look at the cognitive pieces of that person. So how are they thinking about things, right? And there's actually quite a bit of what we call cognitive distortions. Distortion means like, you know, ways of thinking, right? Or ways of perceiving things that are not entirely helpful and not entirely accurate. And, you know, one of them is unfavorable comparison, right? It's like, you know, people are not comparing apple to apple. They're just comparing apple to oranges, you know, so that leads to psychological difficulty. Now that's one of them, right? So when and the other thing that you talked about is the locus of control that we talked about, that we tend to think about when we're counseling people. So we tend to look at whether or not that person, again, I mean, is trying to exert any control over things that they do not have control of. Now, what we know is when somebody is constantly doing that, right? They're trying to change the situation, but fail to recognize their own limitations. That also brings psychological difficulty, right? So part of the help is to help that person to recognize, hey, you know what? When you're comparing this to that, is that a really fair comparison, or what do you think? And then the other one is, hey, what do you think you actually have control of?
She keeps saying that she got no. And we keep helping, and then she just keeps saying that you people can't help.
Yeah, and again, I mean, the helplessness is one of them, right? You know, so I mean, it really depends on, I mean, if she's in counseling, if she's going to counseling, I mean, the counselor will have to help her to kind of figure out, again, I mean, with respect to the control piece, what do you have control? What do you don't? What are you going to do with the pieces that you have control of? What do you do with the pieces that you don't have control of? Right? So this is, you know, a little bit, again, more advanced, but, you know, whoever that is asking this question, what I'm going to do is at the end of the presentation, I'll also give you some tips. If somebody is around you and is struggling with depression, I mean, the idea is how can you help? Right. And sometimes not a lot really, but, you know, there are things that we want to say and we don't want to say to people who are depressed. And I'll talk about that at the end of the presentation here. Okay. Now, I would like to continue on. I mean, I'd like to mention that there are types of depression. There are different types of depression. Some of them are actually time specific. Okay. Meaning, again, I mean, it has to do with change again. When people think about postpartum depression, I mean, it happens to especially women who has just delivered, you know, a baby, right? And it happens sometimes weeks or months after they have delivered that baby. And some women are prone to develop postpartum depression, right? And it's a very serious condition. Now, again, it has to do with the element of change, the change of identity, the change of life routine, the change of, you know, a lot of different family situation dynamics. So those are postpartum depression. Now, sometimes what we also find is people tend to be more depressed in the winter than the summer. Okay. Now, there are many factors that goes into it. That's what we call seasonal affective disorder. So some types of depression belongs to that, meaning like, you know, when, and especially for Canadian winter, because it's long and it's cold and it's dark and people can't usually get out, people don't exercise as much. So the decrease of physical activity, the increase of social isolation, you know, even the lack of sun, meaning vitamin D, can also contribute to depression. Okay, so just to bear in mind, I mean, some of them are really time specific as well, especially the winter or after people has delivered. That can also be a factor as well. All right, I just wanted to talk about really how common this is. I mean, depression is very, very common. Again, I mean, an estimated about 1 in 4 Canadians has a degree of depression serious enough to need treatment at some point in his or her life. So among, I don't know, there are how many of us here, I mean, but at least 1 in 4 of us, you know, would develop or experience some kind of conditions like this throughout our lifetime that is serious enough to need treatment. Okay, so that just tells you how common depression is nowadays, and it could be triggered by a lot of different factors. But again, you know, as I talked about, mostly about change, or it could be nothing at all, right? You know, there are times when you ask people, so what happened to you? Tell me about your past or everything. I mean, everything can be fine and dandy, but all of a sudden, for some reason, right, something has changed in their mind, or, you know, it could be chemistry, it could be anything that people just, you know, started to feel depressed. So it could be nothing. It doesn't have to be a negative event. They just happen to get it. Okay. Now, there are also serious, I mean, there are also different extent to the depression. Some can be very mild, which is easily treatable, moderate to major depression. Major depression maybe is a lot, somewhat difficult to treat, but at the same time, major depression might also require the need of medication on top of psychotherapy or talk therapy. So it really depends on the severity of somebody. You know, how sad, how intense the feelings are, how long, that kind of thing. Now, I'd like to have some time here. I just wanted to play a video. Now, I have been showing slide, and you know, these are all about dogs, and this presentation actually talks to us and tells us what does it feel to actually be depressed. And I'll just take a second to show this video. It's very short, and maybe I'll get some feedback from all of you in terms of, you know, what do you notice in the video. Okay, it's actually a cartoon. It's pretty fun to watch. So what I'm going to do is I'll play this. You can let me know whether or not you can hear this. Can everyone hear this?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm just going to turn it down a little bit, and I am going to play this. Okay.
Depression. Whenever the black dog made an appearance, I felt empty and life just seemed to slow down. He would surprise me with a visit for no reason or occasion.
Can you raise the volume, Marcus?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel older than my years. When the rest of the world seemed to be enjoying life, I could only see it through the black dog. Activities that usually brought me pleasure suddenly ceased to. He liked to ruin my appetite. He chewed up my memory and my ability to concentrate. Doing anything or going anywhere with the black dog required superhuman strength. At social occasions, he'd sniff out what confidence I had and chase it away. My biggest fear was being found out. I worried that people would judge me. Because of the shame and stigma of the black dog, I was constantly worried that I'd be found out. So I invested vast amounts of energy into covering him up. Keeping up an emotional lie is exhausting. Black dog could make me think and say negative things. He could make me irritable and difficult to be around. He would take my love and bury my intimacy. He loved nothing more than to wake me up with highly repetitive and negative thinking. He also liked to remind me how exhausted I was going to be the next day. Having a black dog in your life isn't so much about feeling a bit down, sad or blue. At its worst, it's about being devoid of feeling altogether. As I got older, the black dog got bigger and he started hanging around all the time. I'd chase him off with whatever I thought might send him running. But more often than not, he'd come out on top. Going down became easier than getting up again. So I became rather good at self-medication, which never really helped. Eventually, I felt totally isolated from everything and everyone. The black dog had finally succeeded in hijacking my life. When you lose all joy in life, you can begin to question what the point of it is. Thankfully, this was the time that I sought professional help. This was my first step towards recovery and a major turning point in my life. I learned that it doesn't matter who you are, the black dog affects millions and millions of people. It is an equal opportunity mongrel. I also learned that there was no silver bullet or magic pill. Medication can help some, and others might need a different approach altogether. I also learned that being emotionally genuine and authentic to those who are close to you can be an absolute game changer. Most importantly, I learned not to be afraid of the black dog, and I taught him a few new tricks of my own. The more tired and stressed you are, the louder he barks. So it's important to learn how to quiet your mind. It's been clinically proven that regular exercise can be as effective for treating mild to moderate depression as antidepressants. So go for a walk or a run and leave the muck behind. Keep a mood journal. Getting your thoughts on paper can be cathartic and often insightful. Also keep track of the things that you have to be grateful for. The most important thing to remember is that no matter how bad it gets, if you take the right steps, talk to the right people, black dog days can and will pass. I wouldn't say that I'm grateful for the black dog, but he's been an incredible teacher. He forced me to reevaluate and simplify my life. I learned that rather than running away from my problems, it's better to embrace them. The black dog may always be part of my life, but he'll never be the beast that he was. We have an understanding. I've learned through knowledge, patience, discipline and humor, the worst black dog can be made to heal. If you're in difficulty, never be afraid to ask for help. There is absolutely no shame in doing so. The only shame is missing out on life.
Okay. Let's stop sharing. I'm going to share again. Now, any thoughts or feedback about this video at all? What did you learn?
That doesn't really kind of relate it too much, but one thing we noticed that the persons that whenever you ask why she is sad and she is not telling the truth and she is telling you some other reasons, so we're trying to help, but that's not the main reason that she said. So that means that we never help. We'll never be able to help, because when we're trying to help for one way, and actually that's not the true things that is helping.
Yeah. Now, that's a good question. Now, when it comes to people getting help, now, first of all, I'm glad that you and some friends are willing to help that person. But at the same time, we also need to look at whether or not the other person is ready for change.
She's always denial with things.
Yeah. So it means that she's not ready for change. So it's one thing that you're ready to help, but the other thing is whether or not the other person is ready for change. Now, sometimes it takes longer for people to be ready for that change process, right? Some people live in denial. Some people do not want to admit it, right? You know, like in this video, like this cartoon, this gentleman here, he was originally hiding or lying to people that, yeah, I'm okay, or they just give some random reasons why I'm feeling this way, right? And maybe they'll never talk about, truly how they feel. It also means that perhaps the person that we're really dealing with might not be ready for change yet, right? So as a supporter, what you're really trying to do is, instead of forcing that person to tell the truth or tell you exactly what they're struggling with, what you have to do is really to create space, because you can't really force anybody who's depressed to talk to you. You just have to create space and be like, hey, you know what? I know that, yeah, no matter what you're talking about, I know that you're really experiencing a very hard time. I'm here to talk to you whenever you want to talk to me. Right? So what you want to do is you want to keep your door open without really forcing that person to kind of tell you the truth, because perhaps they might not be ready. They may not even recognize that they're struggling, right? The fact is, most people who are depressed, they're unaware of depression. Like, they don't know. They just know that they're so stuck in their mind that they don't know that they're actually depressed, right? They feel sad, they feel unhappy all the time, but they don't know that, depression is already affecting them.
But sometimes you can't be just a good listener. You want to help.
Yeah. Now, and this is a boundary that you will have to manage. It's like, okay, if somebody fell into a hole, you give them a hand to pull them up, but they have to be willing to kind of grab your hand and be pulled up. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
you have to have a lot of patience. Like, when you're dealing with people who are depressed, you have to have a lot of patience. And you have to wait, and you have to create space. You have to make the other person feel that I'm not here to judge. Whatever feelings that you're talking about is valid, although sometimes you may not agree with what the other person is thinking or feeling. And most of the time you don't have to, but you can validate them and be like, yeah, I may not exactly understand or agree with what you're thinking about, but all I know is you're struggling with a hard time, and I can see that, right? So seeing stuff like that, sometimes people feel people are denying their issues because they also feel like people are denying them as well, right? You don't know how I feel. I mean, how are you supposed to know, and all that stuff. And sometimes it's easier to tell them that, hey, you know what, I may not know exactly how you feel because I'm not you. But
yeah, that's what she keeps saying, that I'm not you. So then she always said that, oh, you got a better life, I don't. And then somebody did mention that never, when you say something, talk about something, don't talk about your happy life, because then you have to make them feel bad feeling.
It does require some kind of sensitivity when you talk to people who are depressed. And of course, when people tell you that you don't understand, if I were, I would just admit that, and I'll be like, yeah, I don't understand, but this is what I'm here for. I'm here to understand you. Can you tell me a little bit in terms of what you're going through? Right. And when people tell you that you don't understand, don't tell them that I do understand. Don't do that, because you're not them, they're not you. I mean, instead tell them that, yeah, maybe I really don't, but I care about you. Tell me about what you're struggling with. And when you're listening, when you're hearing that person out, do not judge, do not give comments. And what we do is we give the person unconditional acceptance. Meaning, like, no matter how you feel, how you think about it, yeah, I accept that, because these are your thoughts, these are your feelings, they must be valid. Whether or not I agree with it, it doesn't matter. Because you're right, it's your life, this is how you think about it, but I just want to hear you out. So when you approach people that way, people are often more open to talk about themselves. Right? So don't ever think that, and the idea is, don't ever think that it's your responsibility to change them, because you cannot. You cannot change their perspective. They have to change their own perspective, but, they have to be ready for that process. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to this black dog, what I wanted to mention about this video is quite revealing, because it's like when you have depression, you almost feel like there's always this black dog following you behind. It's like no matter what you do, life is always dark, it's always black. It's like no matter what I think and how I feel, it's always dark and always black. I can't seem to do anything without this black dog. But with the right help, you can actually manage this dog and put this dog behind you, right? It's like no matter what you think, it's like constantly you have a dog barking at you and be like, yeah, you're this, you're that. I mean, you're bad, you suck, and all that stuff. Now, in counseling, we help people to actually cope with those voices, right, from depression. So this is sort of the experience. I'm just trying to go to the next page. Yep. So I've got a bit more time here. Just quickly go through, and I don't know what is the age range here, but I know traditionally MFC Foundation, we do a lot of our members and our students are really the elderly population. So meaning that we're a bit older, we're in a different stage of life. I just wanted to mention that, I mean, even if you're not an elderly yourself, you have elderly around you. So this is still quite important to remember. Now, depression in the elderly people, especially in older people, is often under-recognized, okay, or unrecognized. Like people don't tend to think that older people can be depressed because they've got so many experience in life already. Why are people depressed, right? You know, what we also know that is that older people or older elders, usually when it comes to depression, they often complain more of the physical symptoms more than the emotional symptoms. Partly, I think, is because of, I think, the culture that perhaps we know that our elderly citizens, you know, they're not really very keen all the time to talk about how they feel, right? That's just because of socialization. Maybe when they were younger, there's no talk about mental health, about happiness or sadness, it's just life. So when they're depressed, they talk about physical symptoms. Yeah, you know, I feel dizzy, I feel pain, or, you know, I'm lacking energy. Now, what we also know is, you know, within the elderly population, not just the elderly, but in the general population, depression increased the risk of cardiac disease, increased the risk of death, followed by a heart attack, and also the likelihood of death following by any disease. So let's say if you have a physical condition on top of depression, it can actually make those conditions worse. Not necessary, but sometimes, okay? We also know that people who are between 18 to 84, the risk of suicide as a result of depression is almost twice as much as the rest of the population. So that is actually a quite significant issue. Now, people may wonder, why are older people, you know, struggling with depression then? I mean, what are some of the factors? One thing that we do know and what research have been telling us is, you know, it has to do with loss. The older you are, the more losses that you often would endure in your life. At advanced age, often accompanied with loss. So what that means is, if you think about the older you are, things that you're about to lose, okay? For example, your physical ability, right? Your health, your more health issues. You know, the loss of friends as you get older. People are perhaps around you, good friends, let's say, passing away. Your partner, right, may be sick or passing away. For grandparents or parents, older parents, their children or grandchildren are getting older, right? They're busy with their own lives. They grieve the loss of family time, right? They grieve the loss of their own ability. And this is why older people tend to, I mean, there's quite a bit of changes that older people are experiencing, and they have to do with losses, right? Loss of health, loss of people, loss of house. Let's say you have to move to a senior home, then your own residence, that's also a loss as well, right? So when it comes to losses, it may make older people more prone to depression. it's important to remember that although the elderly population is vulnerable to depression, it is definitely not a normal symptom of aging. Just because you age doesn't mean that you have to be depressed, but there's a lot of factors within aging that can make people more prone to depression. Now, these are some of them risk factors. For example, emotionally painful events. For example, as I talked about, your partner have been together for a long time, 15, 60 years in the marriage. All of a sudden, your partner is sick and then your partner passed away. Close friends whom you have known for a long time, right? So these can trigger a lot of difficult emotional experience. Now, if you have had any kind of experience of depression in the past, that could be a risk factors. Low income, you think about when you're older, you're still worried about money, so that's an external factor, right? That could come in. So stress of life, decreasing quality of lifestyle, and decreased sense of purpose. Yeah, that's another thing that older people often experience is, I'm getting older, there's no point living, I don't know why I'm here, I'm just stuck at home all the time. My kids are not often to see me. I don't have to take care of my grandchildren anymore. So what's the purpose here? It is very important. I mean, if any one of us in the audience belongs to this population, it is really important. If there's one thing that you remember from this presentation is I ask you to form a network of support. And of course, the MFC Foundation is a very good support network. I mean, you want to build your support network when you're older so that you can continue to socialize with others, so that you can feel less alone and you have people to support you. The last thing that you want to do, again, it says on the slide here, is lack of social contact and social isolation. When people are isolated, when they're feeling lonely, it's just a recipe of disaster, meaning like it will harm you. The effect of isolation is huge when people feel like they're by themselves alone and have nobody around them. Make sure you stay in contact with friends and you try your best to do it. I know it's a lot harder under COVID right now, and this is why during COVID, we do see a lot of people struggling with mental health issues like anxiety and depression because of isolation, because people are not seeing one another, they're not hugging, they're not shaking hands, they're not, eating lunch or having meals with one another. When people are becoming increasingly isolated, it makes them more prone to think and feel in a negative way because human beings are social creatures at the first place. Again, declining in health, disability limitations, feeling loneliness, isolation I talked about. Sometimes side effects of medications can make people depressed as well. Any questions around this so far? So again, if anything that you want to remember, it is still very important when you're old to make friends and to maintain contacts with friends and families. Don't shut yourself down. Don't hide in your apartment because you will be affected by that. Now, I've got a depression screening tool here, which I'm not going to go into, but on the Alberta government website, there's actually a depression screening tools. It does ask you a few questions to ask you whether or not you might struggle with depression and how many common symptoms you have of depression. So I'm not going to go into that, but if you want, you can feel free to just type on Google Alberta government depression screening tool, and it's going to come up on the screen, and you can actually do a self-test. Okay. Now, I just wanted to talk about this very quickly. People have asked, in the past, so Marcus, when do I go and seek help? Now, just thinking about this, I'm just going to give a list here. If you have 5 or more of these symptoms and your symptoms have lasted more than 2 weeks, maybe you want to consider talking to people about it. For example, some of the feelings: I feel worthless, helpless, hopeless, I'm sleeping more or less than usual. I'm eating more or less than usual. I have difficulty concentrating or making decisions recently, and it's been 2 weeks. I've lost interest in activities that I used to enjoy. I have less desire for sex. I tend to avoid people. I have an overwhelming feeling of sadness or grief. I feel unreasonably guilty. I have a lot of unexplained stomachache and headaches. I feel very tired and restless. I'm feeling more irritable and tearful as usual. So somebody talked about crying more and emotional, or I have thoughts of suicide or death of suicide. If you struggle 5 or more of these statements or symptoms, and they have lasted for 2 weeks, please do reach out. I think the very first and very easy contact is going to be a family doctor, or secondly, a counselor for help. Okay, make sure you talk to somebody, get the right help. And counselors and doctors may prescribe you with medications, but counselor will have different ways to help you to understand where some of those emotional or psychological difficulties coming from. And I'll talk about how we help in a second. So in terms of treatment, again, I mean, your doctor might prescribe you with medications like antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, antipsychotic medications. I'm not going to go into that, but sometimes doctors, if they think that it is appropriate, they may give you some kind of antidepressant to try. Okay, especially for people who are more severe, when it comes to depression. Okay. Now, the other kind of treatment would be what we do as counselors. That's what we talk about, talk therapy. Now, in Canada here, there are a couple of people or a couple kinds of people who can deliver talk therapy, psychologists, social workers, registered counselors. Now, all of these people in these professions are trained professional, and we have different ways to help people to manage some of their difficulties that they're experiencing. So there are different modalities of counseling. Okay, and this is what we have been practicing, learning from our education. We do try to help people and talk to people in a way, for example, giving them different perspectives, helping them to understand what depression is, helping them to give them some coping techniques, just to kind of get out from that depression. So the therapy helps people to step back and see what might be contributing to their problems and how they can make changes. So talk therapy is also another way to go about it as well. Now, traditionally, what research has been telling us is, the best kind of treatment is usually medication and psychotherapy combined. Some people are like, well, can I just take medication, not talk to a counselor? You can, but it does help with some people, but others, it is a lot more effective, to do talk therapy at the same time. So psychological treatment to anxiety and depression is proven clinically, and it can help people to kind of resolve their own issues. Now, if you're struggling with depression on your own, the question is, what can you do to feel better? Now, I know these tips are very simple tips, but I don't want you to underestimate them. Okay, the first one is really reach out to other people, people whom you can trust. Of course, people not whom you think that will judge you, right, or give you unsolicited advice, but people who are willing to listen to you. Listen to you attentively without judging you. Now, for somebody who's supporting somebody who's going through depression, same thing. We have to learn how to just listen without providing any kind of suggestion or comments, unless the people ask you to give them. Okay, we constantly make the mistakes of believing that we know what the other person is feeling, so that we have some advice, right? But this is what most people are looking for. Some of the time, most of the time, people are just really looking for somebody who can listen them out. Not judging. Now, moving exercise, the video talked about, the more you exercise, right? The more that it does release good chemicals in your brain that helps battle with depression. When people are out of the house, when people are running or even walking around the block, what they're doing is they're really engaging with their external environment. They're, watching birds or watching trees or whatever. It does help to shift their mind, into better things sometimes, right? So start from very small activities, go for a block. As an assignment that we often give to our clients, is really to get them out of the house so that they can break isolation. Of course, taking care of your diet, and lastly, find ways to remain engaged with the world. Meaning, again, it talks about the isolation piece. You have to make yourself to engage with the world. Spend time engaging in the nature, caring for a pet, doing volunteering, grab a hobby that you enjoy. Once you participate in the world again, you start to feel better. One thing that we know that is that when people are depressed, and part of the perpetuating factors that continue to make people to feel depressed is because they choose to shut themselves down. They're not talking to people, they're hiding. Nothing's going to get better. Their mind's not going to shift, right? Now, lastly, I wanted to talk about, if you're not the person who's going through depression, but you're somebody who is supporting somebody, what can you do? I know somebody asked me, questions like this throughout the presentation. What can you do? Now, these are some of the things that you might want to say to the person. You don't have to say a lot sometimes. And what we know is, a lot of times people are just busy thinking about what to say to that person, but forgetting how to listen to that person. Whether or not whatever that they talk about, whether or not you agree, again, you can just simply listen and be like, yeah, I don't know what you're going through, but I'd like to know. I'm here for you. You're not alone in this. Tell me what I can do to help. They might say there's nothing you can do to help. And you're like, yeah, no, that's fine. I'm going to be here with you. As long as you want to talk, I'm here. And that's how I help. Right? Now, you also want to educate yourself with signs of depression. So again, just because most people, and a lot of people, when they're depressed, they don't even know that they're struggling with depression. If you, as a supportive person, if you understand the signs of it, now you can help to tell that person, hey, you know what? I feel like maybe you are struggling. You're not just sad, but how I've been seeing that you're sad for a while, or for a long time already. Have you ever thought about the possibility of getting depression? Right? Just ask questions. Give positive reinforcement. So share what you've noticed about the person. Talk about why you're concerned. Explain what you've learned about depression. So you can tell the person, you know what, I just got out of a presentation today knowing more about this, and I feel like this is what you're struggling. Right? Do you want some help in this? Do you want to talk to a doctor? Do you want to talk to a counselor? Help them out. Now, at the end of the day, nothing is more and nobody is more important than yourself. Taking care of somebody or helping somebody through depression can be very discouraging and tiring sometimes. Just because sometimes what we know is depression can be contagious. So if you're surrounded by people who are depressed, sometimes it makes you depressed because of that negative energy, because emotions are contagious. So you need to take care of yourself. If you find yourself running out of solutions or running out of things to say, just take a step back and be like, ooh, I need to take care of myself first before I come back to talk to this person. Do not stress yourself, because if you're not trained, if you're not a professional, it's really hard. But the best you could do is just to be there for that person. Okay. Now,
how can I ask how you can handle that? What they told you, and it's not true, and that eventually you will be so sick of hearing it, because that things that telling you is not true. So how can you handle that?
Like, are you asking me as a counselor, or are you asking you as a friend?
Asking you as a counselor.
Yeah, so again, I mean, a lot of that goes back to the basic. So when we're in counseling, first that we gotta do is we need to develop or establish what we call a therapeutic relationship with the client very quickly. We have to help the client to understand that, you know, the reason why they're here, they're not being judged. This is my job to help them, right? And I care about them as an individual, right? And whatever that they tell me, I would just accept it. You know, it could be the most craziest or bizarre thought that they have. I would still accept it. I would let them know that the reason why you're struggling today maybe it's not about you, but something is affecting your mood and your ability to think positively. So it's not them. And one of the examples that I often talk about is, you know, and I don't want the person to blame themselves because they don't want to feel this way either. Right? If you think about this, they don't want to feel this way either. So sometimes I tell people that, hey, you know what? It's like when you catch a flu or a cold, what symptoms would you get? And they would tell me, well, I sneeze and I cough and I lay in bed and all that stuff. And I tell them, well, when you get depression, you get negative thinking, you get low energy, you get depressive mood, right? You get suicidal thoughts. It's the same thing, but it's not you, right? You know, so I help the client to understand and to stop kind of think that they're crazy or they're weird. And then I go into explore what is it exactly that is bothering them. And then I find out, hey, you know what? Are the clients thinking in a way that is neutral? Are the clients thinking in a way that is healthy? Or is the client thinking in a way that is, there's a lot of distortions, meaning like, you know, is the client always thinking about the worst? Is the client using unfavorable comparison? Is the client having black and white thinking? So it's either or nothing. So we help the clients to identify some of those patterns. There's a lot of different ways to go about, you know, doing counseling with somebody, and you need to be very skillfully trained. And this is why it's not something that a normal person without the education can do. But what you can do without the counseling background is always to be there and supportive. Just to listen and, you know, don't pretend that you know, again, don't pretend that you understand, but be there and be like, yeah, you know what? I'm here all the time if you want to talk to me, right? Of course, there are times you have to take care of yourself and you have to protect yourself as well.
But you eventually you will be so sick though.
Yeah,
listening all the time.
Yeah, and you will be, and this is why you will have to take care of yourself, and you will have to ask the person, hey, you know what? Do you want to talk to your doctor about this? Because I bet you don't want to feel like this forever. They're like, well, how can the doctor help me? And this is where you can help and be like, well, I know that counselors can help. Does that make sense? Now, the most immediate resources would be your family doctor that can actually make a referral to AHS. Now, locally, there's the Calgary Counseling Center, Distress Center, or CARIA, when if you're an older adult, but also depending on your language needs. You know, it's always best to speak to your doctor first and have them assess you. But you know, you're also welcome to reach out to different counseling agencies and submit an intake. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I am going to I don't know how to come back to this, but I am going to stop sharing. Now, does anybody have any kind of last questions before we end here?